It was supposed to be a normal Saturday in early spring, the kind that started with sunshine filtering through kitchen blinds and ended with homemade pasta dinners and movie nights. Clara Whitmore kissed her husband Peter goodbye and stepped out of their modest home in Flagstaff, Arizona, a reusable canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She said she'd be back in an hour, just enough time to swing by the local grocery store for bread, eggs, and a bottle of Peter's favorite red wine. It wasn't unusual. Clara was the glue of the household, a woman of routines and gentle warmth, always taking care of the family's needs without fuss or delay. But this time, Clara never came back. Her disappearance was so sudden, so complete, that it seemed at first like a misunderstanding. Peter called her cell when the sun began to dip behind the ponderosa pines that framed their quiet neighborhood, thinking perhaps she'd bumped into a friend or gotten caught in a long checkout line. But the phone rang and rang until it switched to voicemail. When she still hadn't returned by dinner time, he called again, then again, and again. Each unanswered call turned the air colder, the shadows longer, the silence more deafening. By the time midnight struck, Peter had phoned every friend, relative, and neighbor they knew. No one had seen Clara. She had vanished without a trace, no calls, no notes, no charges on her credit card, not even a traffic cam sighting of her beloved forest green Toyota Corolla. It was as if she had walked out of their world and into another. The next day, Peter filed a missing persons report. The police were polite but cautious. Adults go missing for many reasons, they said. Maybe she needed space. Maybe there was a personal crisis she hadn't shared. Maybe, though they didn't say it aloud, she'd chosen to leave. But Peter refused to believe that. Clara would never abandon her family. She loved their 5 children more than anything. They were her world. At the time, Dylan was 16, the eldest and the most perceptive. He took it the hardest, retreating into himself, skipping school, obsessively checking the news, the police bulletin boards, even local Facebook groups for any mention of his mother. Max was 11, Lena 9, Nina 5, and Julian had just turned 1. Too young to understand what had happened. The younger ones watched their once stable world crumble. Meals became quiet. Birthdays felt hollow. Holidays passed like shadows. 1 week after Clara disappeared, Peter had a stroke. It was sudden and brutal. He collapsed on the stairs, fell, and broke his hip. The trauma of losing Clara, coupled with the physical damage, left him paralyzed from the waist down. He became confined to a wheelchair, the sparkle in his eyes dimmed, and his once strong frame now hunched with weariness. From that point on, Dylan stepped in to hold the family together. He deferred college, took a job as a stock boy at the local supermarket, and learned how to manage medications, bedtime routines, and utility bills before he learned how to legally drink. For 15 years, the Whitmores lived under the weight of Clara's absence. The house never felt the same. The corners were too quiet, the rooms too still. Every creak of the floorboards, every knock at the door raised momentary hope, followed by crushing disappointment. The case went cold after 6 months. No evidence, no witnesses, no leads. The forest green Corolla might as well have been a ghost. Still, Dylan never gave up. Long after the police stopped calling, after the local papers moved on to newer tragedies, he kept searching. He maintained a file box labeled MOM, stuffed with printed emails, handwritten notes, old photographs, maps, receipts, anything that felt like it might matter. He visited forums for the missing, taught himself how to access public records, even contacted private investigators, though he could rarely afford their services. The rest of the family coped in their own ways. Max became an accountant, practical and disciplined, but guarded. Lena managed a bookstore downtown and rarely spoke of their mother. Nina grew up with anxiety issues, fearing any sudden change. Julian, now 16, had no memories of Clara at all, just the stories, the photos, and the heavy silence that followed any mention of her name. Peter, once a proud father and provider, withdrew into himself. He no longer smiled. His eyes followed the clock more than the people around him. For 15 years, their house held the shape of a woman who no longer walked the halls, whose absence echoed louder than any presence. It was on a quiet Sunday afternoon when Dylan received the call that would shatter the stillness of the last decade and a half. The voice on the other end introduced himself as Detective John Vance from the Arizona Department of Public Safety. He spoke in a calm but firm tone, stating that new evidence had come to light in the case of Clara Whitmore. Dylan's heart thudded in his chest as he gripped the phone. The detective explained that during a routine environmental assessment at Willow Creek Lake, a drone survey had picked up a submerged object that turned out to be a car. Upon retrieval, the license plate and VIN matched the forest green Toyota Corolla registered to Clara Whitmore. Dylan sat down hard on the couch, his breath caught in his throat. The detective continued, stating that the vehicle had been pulled from a remote section of the lake, and though there were no human remains inside, several personal items were recovered. Among them was a sealed plastic bag containing a photograph of Clara smiling at a family picnic, a pair of men's sunglasses engraved with the name Ronald, and a gas station receipt dated 3 days after her disappearance, signed under the name Evelyn Carter. Dylan barely heard the rest. A flurry of emotions surged through him: shock, vindication, fear. He had always believed his mother didn't leave voluntarily, and now, perhaps, there was proof. He thanked the detective and promised to gather his family for a discussion. That night, the Whitmore family gathered around the dinner table as they used to, except this time the air was dense with anticipation. Dylan relayed the conversation word for word. Reactions were mixed. Max was skeptical, Lena quiet, Nina visibly shaken, and Julian simply confused. Peter, pale and silent, stared at his folded hands. When Dylan mentioned the name Ronald, Lena flinched. She remembered once hearing their mother whisper that name on the phone in hushed tones years ago. It had sounded intimate, urgent. Why would she have a different name on a receipt? Max asked, arms crossed. And whose sunglasses were those? Dylan didn't have answers, only more questions. But one thing was clear. The story they had told themselves for 15 years was no longer solid. Cracks were forming. The next morning, Dylan drove to the police station to meet Detective Vance in person. The detective handed him an envelope containing copies of the recovered items, including the photograph, the receipt, and the evidence logs. Vance explained that while the car showed no signs of a crash, no dents, no broken glass, it had clearly been submerged deliberately. All the windows were rolled down. The gas tank was nearly full, and it had been parked on a slope leading directly into the water. This wasn't a panic. It was a plan. Dylan left the station with the envelope tucked tightly under his arm, his mind ablaze with possibilities. If Clara had staged her disappearance or been forced to, who had helped her? And why would she leave clues behind after all these years? That night, unable to sleep, Dylan opened the envelope and examined the documents again. That was when he noticed the handwriting on the receipt. It wasn't unfamiliar. The loops, the tilt of the letters, it was Clara's. Even though the name said Evelyn Carter, the hand that signed it was his mother's. The pieces were beginning to align, but the picture they formed was far more complex than he'd ever imagined. And Dylan knew this was only the beginning of a much darker truth. Dylan couldn't stop thinking about the name on the receipt, Evelyn Carter. It nagged at him like a splinter in his mind, refusing to be ignored. Why would his mother use a different name? Was she trying to hide? Protect herself? And from whom? The engraved sunglasses added another layer of mystery. Who was Ronald? A friend? An accomplice? Or something far more sinister? Restless, Dylan turned to the documents again, scanning for anything he might have missed. That was when he noticed something almost overlooked, a small, water-damaged lease agreement tucked between the photograph and the receipt. The ink was smeared, but some of the text was still legible. The lease was for a property located in an industrial district on the outskirts of Tucson, signed by Evelyn Carter. But what stopped Dylan cold was the signature. Even distorted by water and time, the flourish of the C and the loop of the R were unmistakable. It was Clara's handwriting. He didn't tell anyone about the lease. Not yet. The last time he'd brought evidence to the family, he was met with skepticism and silence. He needed answers first. Early the next morning, Dylan made the 3-hour drive to Tucson, winding through the vast desert landscapes until he reached a stretch of industrial buildings surrounded by chain-link fences and gravel lots. The address on the lease led him to a weathered one-story structure with a faded sign, Quality Furniture Refurbishing. A lone pickup truck sat beside a rusted side entrance, and a dim light flickered from within. The place looked abandoned, yet oddly alive, like it had secrets buried beneath its quiet exterior. Dylan parked a short distance away and considered his options. He hadn't told Detective Vance, hadn't even mentioned the lease. Was this a mistake? Before he could second-guess himself, a figure emerged from a side door, a man in his 60s, carrying a cup of steaming coffee in a plastic container. He spotted Dylan's car immediately and began walking toward it with a deliberate, measured gait. Despite the late hour and desert chill, the man wore only a light jacket over a dark uniform shirt with no logo. His face was weathered, but his eyes were sharp, almost too sharp. "Evenin'," the man said as Dylan rolled down the window. "You lost? Not many folks end up out here by accident." Dylan forced a smile, rehearsing the cover story he had practiced in the car. "Yeah, might have taken a wrong turn, but I saw the sign. I'm actually looking for warehouse space. Small business expansion." The guard raised an eyebrow. "This ain't for sale. Belongs to Harvey Doss." Dylan blinked. That name again. Harvey Doss, son of Raymond Doss. "You never heard of Raymond?" Dylan shook his head, pretending ignorance. "Should I have?" The guard chuckled dryly. "Used to own half the industrial land around here. Shady deals, but nothing ever stuck. Died a few years ago. Harvey runs things now. Keeps to himself." "Any chance I could talk to him?" Dylan asked. "Maybe rent some space?" The guard took a long sip of coffee. "Harvey doesn't meet people, but Ronald handles that. He's in and out. Might be here tomorrow. Ask for him." Dylan nodded, committing the name to memory. "Ronald," he repeated. "Got it." The guard turned to walk away, but paused when Dylan called out again. "One more thing. Have you ever heard of a woman named Evelyn Carter?" The effect was immediate. The guard stiffened, his posture no longer casual, but alert, suspicious. He stepped closer to Dylan's window, his voice now colder. "You need to leave," he said flatly. "Now." Dylan's pulse quickened. "I just need to know if—" The guard moved with surprising speed, placing both hands on the window's edge and leaning in until their faces were inches apart. "You want ghosts?" he said in a low, menacing tone. "You're in the right place." She didn't want to be found. Dylan's breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean?" The guard knocked on the car frame. "Come back tomorrow. Ask for Ronald. But if I were you, I'd forget you were ever here." Dylan didn't wait for a second warning. He backed away, tires crunching over gravel, eyes locked with the guards until the building vanished from his rearview mirror. Back in Flagstaff that night, Dylan sat in his parked car for over an hour, the envelope of evidence beside him, his mind racing. The guard's reaction wasn't just defensive, it was terrified. The name Evelyn Carter meant something to him. He'd recognized it instantly. Clara had been here. She had used that name. And someone, maybe Ronald, had helped her disappear. Or forced her to. Unable to keep this to himself, Dylan called Detective Vance. The detective answered groggily, clearly woken from sleep, but listened intently as Dylan recounted everything. The lease, the drive to Tucson, the warehouse, the guard, the name Ronald. There was a pause on the line before Vance responded. "You shouldn't have gone alone," he said. "If there's even a chance your mother was connected to the DOS operation, we're dealing with people who don't play by the rules. You could have been seriously hurt." Dylan swallowed hard. But the guard knew her name. He said she didn't want to be found. Another pause. Then Vance's tone changed. "That warehouse, if it's still active, and Clara was using it 15 years ago, it might be more than just a place to hide. DOS ran operations, illegal ones. Identity changes, money laundering, even trafficking. That warehouse might have been a transition point." Dylan's grip on the phone tightened. "You think she disappeared voluntarily?" "I think," Vance said carefully, "that she might have had no choice. And if she was trying to protect you, that changes everything." The call ended with a promise. Detective Vance would assemble a team and meet Dylan the next day. This time, they'd go together. And this time, they'd be ready. As Dylan finally pulled away from the curb and headed home, one thought haunted him. What kind of life had his mother been living for the last 15 years? And what had she given up to keep them safe? Morning arrived with a clarity that had eluded Dylan throughout his restless night. After tossing and turning for hours, he had finally fallen into a fitful sleep around 4 a.m., only to be awakened by his phone ringing at 7:30. The caller ID displayed Detective Vance's number. "I'm on my way to pick you up," the detective said without preamble when Dylan answered. "We're going to that warehouse, but we're doing it my way. Be ready in 15 minutes." True to his word, Detective Vance pulled up outside Dylan's apartment building exactly 15 minutes later. He was driving an unmarked police car, dressed in plain clothes rather than his usual suit, jeans, a faded button-down shirt, and a worn leather jacket that made him look more like a construction worker than a detective. Dylan climbed into the passenger seat, noticing immediately that the detective wasn't alone. In the back seat sat another man, also in plain clothes, whom Vance introduced simply as Officer Miller, tactical support. "I've been up all night coordinating this," Vance explained as he pulled away from the curb. "Based on what you told me about Raymond Doss and his son Harvey, we're treating this as a potentially dangerous situation. I've got plainclothes officers stationed at strategic locations around the warehouse and a tactical team on standby a few blocks away. Shouldn't we take my car?" Dylan suggested. "The guard saw it last night. It might seem less suspicious." Detective Vance considered this for a moment before nodding. "You're right. We'll switch vehicles at the next parking lot." 10 minutes later, they had transferred to Dylan's car with Dylan behind the wheel and Detective Vance in the passenger seat. Officer Miller remained in the unmarked police car, which would now serve as part of the surveillance perimeter. "Remember, you're not to get out of the car unless I explicitly tell you to," Detective Vance instructed as they approached the industrial zone where the warehouse was located. "I'm only allowing you to come along because you've already made contact and your presence will seem less suspicious. But this is a police operation, not a family investigation." Dylan nodded, his mouth dry with anticipation and nervousness. As they turned onto the street leading to the warehouse, he could see the same pickup truck parked outside that had been there the night before. But something felt different. The place seemed quieter, more still. "Something's not right," Detective Vance muttered, his experienced eyes scanning the property. No movement, no vehicles except that truck. Dylan pulled into the gravel lot and parked in approximately the same spot as the previous night. They sat for a moment, observing the warehouse. The windows remained covered, But unlike the night before, no lights were visible inside. "Wait here," Detective Vance said, his hand moving to the concealed weapon beneath his jacket. "I'm going to take a quick look. If I signal you to leave, drive away immediately and meet Officer Miller at the rendezvous point." Dylan watched as the detective approached the building cautiously, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone trained to assess dangerous situations. Vance first checked the pickup truck, peering through the windows before moving toward the side entrance, where Dylan had seen the guard emerge the night before. After trying the door and finding it unlocked, Detective Vance disappeared inside the building. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Dylan's anxiety grew with each passing moment, his fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. Finally, Detective Vance reappeared at the entrance, gesturing for Dylan to join him. Against his better judgment, but driven by the need to know, Dylan exited the car and hurried across the gravel lot. "It's empty," Detective Vance said as Dylan approached. "Completely cleared out. They must have left in a hurry after your visit last night." Dylan followed the detective into the warehouse, the smell of dust and abandonment filling his nostrils. The interior was cavernous and mostly empty, with clear indications that equipment and furniture had been recently removed. Rectangular clean spots on the dusty floor, empty brackets on the walls where shelving had been attached, severed cables hanging from a ceiling. "They were definitely operating something here," Detective Vance observed, pointing to a section of the warehouse where partitions had created separate rooms. "Look at these makeshift living quarters, workstations." This was more than just storage. Dylan moved slowly through the space, trying to imagine his mother here, trying to understand what connection she might have had to this place. Had she been held against her will? Had she come here voluntarily seeking help to disappear, or was there some other explanation entirely? "Over here," Detective Vance called from across the room. He was crouching beside an overturned desk, examining something on the floor. Dylan joined him to find the detective holding a photograph that had apparently slipped beneath the desk during the hasty evacuation. It showed a cargo ship docked at what appeared to be an industrial port, its name Eastern Horizon, clearly visible on the hull. "Turn it over," Detective Vance said, handing the photograph to Dylan. On the back was handwritten information, the ship's name, a departure schedule dated for the following week, and a partial list of names that included Elizabeth C. and Ronald M. "They're planning to transport people on this ship," Detective Vance said, pulling out his phone. "And based on this list, your mother might be one of them." He immediately radioed his team, requesting a search operation at the harbor and providing the name of the cargo ship. "This is now highest priority," he instructed. "We need to locate the Eastern Horizon and prevent its departure. Alert Harbor Patrol and Coast Guard." Turning to Dylan, he added, "We need to get moving. If Ronald and his people left here last night, they might have accelerated their timetable. The ship could be preparing to leave sooner than scheduled." As they hurried back to the car, Detective Vance made another call, this time requesting officers to check on Peter and the rest of the family. "After your visit last night, these people know someone's asking questions. We need to make sure your family is safe." Dylan felt a surge of fear for his siblings and father. "I didn't think about that," he admitted. "I was so focused on finding Mom." "Call them," Detective Vance instructed as they got back into Dylan's car. "Call each one individually and tell them what's happening. Tell them to stay where they are and that officers will be coming to secure their locations." As they drove toward the harbor, Dylan did as instructed, calling his father first, then each of his siblings in turn, repeating the warning and instructions. Peter was shocked and furious. Max and Lena were skeptical, Julian confused, but all agreed to follow the detective's advice. "They're all warned," Dylan reported to Detective Vance as they neared the harbor. "But I'm not sure they really believe there's any danger." Better safe than sorry, the detective replied grimly. If Ronald and the DOS operation are as dangerous as I suspect, they won't hesitate to use your family as leverage if they feel cornered. The harbor came into view, a sprawling industrial port with numerous piers extending into the gray waters of the bay. Cargo ships of various sizes were docked along the wharves, loading or unloading their shipments, while smaller vessels navigated the channels between them. As they approached the main security gate, Detective Vance flashed his badge to the guard, explaining they were part of an ongoing police operation. The guard waved them through, directing them toward the harbor master's office. Inside, they found a flurry of activity. Several officers were already present, coordinating with harbor officials to locate the eastern horizon. What's the status? Detective Vance asked, approaching a uniformed officer who appeared to be leading the operation. The eastern horizon left port last night, the officer reported, his expression grim. Nearly 12 hours ahead of its filed departure time. Port Authority granted the early departure request due to cited weather concerns, though meteorological reports show no significant weather systems in the area. They knew, Dillon said, the realization hitting him with crushing force. They knew we were on to them as soon as I asked about my mother last night. Detective Vance placed a steadying hand on Dillon's shoulder. We're not giving up. Harbor patrol boats are already in pursuit, and we've alerted the Coast Guard. That ship can't have gone far in 12 hours. What about here? Dillon asked, gesturing toward the docks. Couldn't some of Ronald's people still be around? We're one step ahead of you, the officer replied. We've detained several dock workers who were involved in the Eastern Horizon's accelerated departure. They're being questioned now. Detective Vance nodded in approval. Good work. Let's head to the station. I want to sit in on those interrogations. The drive to the police station was tense, with Detective Vance constantly on his phone coordinating the expanding investigation. Every few minutes, he received updates about the search for the Eastern Horizon or reports about the security measures being put in place to protect the Whitmore family. They've got eyes on the ship, he reported after one such call. Coast Guard aircraft spotted it about 100 miles offshore, heading south. They're dispatching vessels to intercept. Dillon gripped the steering wheel tighter, his mind racing with possibilities. Could his mother really be on that ship? After 15 years, was he finally close to finding her? When they arrived at the station, they found it buzzing with activity. Officers moved purposefully between departments. Phones rang constantly, and an atmosphere of urgency permeated the building. To Dillon's surprise, his entire family was there, seated in a waiting area. Peter in his wheelchair, looking bewildered and tired, Ellie standing protectively behind him, Max and Lena seated side by side, their expressions a mixture of concern and skepticism, and Julian fidgeting nervously in his chair. What are you all doing here? Dillon asked as he approached them. I thought you were staying at home. The police brought us in as a precaution, Max explained, standing to face his brother. They said it would be easier to protect us all in one location. Protect us from what exactly? Lena demanded, her arms crossed defensively. Dillon, what have you done? Before Dillon could respond, Detective Vance stepped forward. Your brother may have uncovered the truth about your mother's disappearance, he said, his tone professional but kind. And that truth could be dangerous for all of you. He quickly briefed the family on what they had discovered, the warehouse, the photograph of the cargo ship, the names on the list, and the possibility that Clara had been forced to work for Ronald and the DOS operation. So, you're saying Mom didn't leave us voluntarily? Ellie asked, her voice small and hopeful. That she was taken? Based on the evidence we've gathered, it appears your mother may have become involved with a criminal organization run by Raymond Doss and his son Harvey, Detective Vance explained. We believe she was forced to work for them, possibly because of a debt or other form of coercion." "That doesn't make any sense," Max objected. "Mom didn't have any debts. Dad handled all the finances back then." Peter, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. All eyes turned to him in surprise. "That's not entirely true," he said quietly. "After my accident, the medical bills were overwhelming," Peter continued, his voice strained with the effort of confession. "Our insurance didn't cover everything. Clara was desperate. She tried to get bank loans, but we'd already maxed out our credit. I was in the hospital, then rehab. I didn't know what exactly she was doing to keep us afloat." "Dad," Dylan said, kneeling beside his father's wheelchair, "are you saying Mom might have borrowed money from someone like Raymond Doss?" Peter nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes. "She mentioned once, just once, that she'd found a way to handle the bills. She said not to worry, that she'd taken care of it. I was so focused on my recovery, on the pain, that I didn't ask questions. I should have asked questions." Detective Vance pulled up a chair and sat across from Peter. "Mr. Whitmore, this is very important. Did your wife ever mention names? Raymond Doss? Ronald? Anyone connected to the loans?" Peter shook his head. "No specific names, but she did say something odd about a week before she disappeared. She said everything she did for us. I thought she was just stressed, saying dramatic things because of the pressure we were under." "I never imagined," his voice broke, and Ellie placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "The men we arrested at the harbor are being questioned now," Detective Vance said, addressing the entire family. "We're hoping they can provide more information about the Eastern Horizon and whether your mother might be on board." "I want to talk to them," Dylan said firmly. Detective Vance hesitated. "That's not standard procedure, Dylan." "Please," Dylan insisted. "I'm the one who spoke to the guard at the warehouse. I might recognize someone, or they might recognize me." After a moment's consideration, Detective Vance nodded. "All right, but just as an observer. I do the talking." He led Dylan down a corridor to a room where they could watch the interrogations through a one-way mirror. Inside the adjacent room, a middle-aged man in dock workers' clothing sat handcuffed to a table, being questioned by two officers. "That's not the guard I met," Dylan said, studying the man. They observed for several minutes, as the dock worker stubbornly refused to provide any information beyond his name and employment at the harbor. Detective Vance made notes on a pad, occasionally murmuring observations about the man's body language or responses. "Let's try the next one," he suggested after it became clear they would get nothing useful from this suspect. In the second interrogation room, they found an older man being questioned, and Dylan immediately tensed. "That's him," he said urgently. "That's the guard from the warehouse." Detective Vance studied the man through the glass. "You're sure?" "Positive," Dylan confirmed. "He's the one who told me about Ronald." The detective nodded thoughtfully. "Let's listen in." Unlike the dock worker, the guard seemed almost relaxed despite his circumstances, answering questions with a detached calm that bordered on amusement. When asked about his employment, he freely admitted to working security for Harvey Doss. When questioned about the Eastern Horizon, he claimed no knowledge of its cargo or destination. "He's lying," Dylan muttered. "He knew about my mother. He all but admitted she was there." Detective Vance watched the interrogation for a few more minutes before making a decision. "I'm going in. Stay here and watch," he said firmly. Dylan nodded and stepped back, his eyes glued to the one-way mirror as the detective entered the room and took a seat across from a guard. Unlike the earlier officers, Vance used a different tone, steady, calm, disarmingly conversational. "You know, we've been watching that warehouse for a while," he began, his voice casual but calculated. "We've identified most of the people who were held there, including Clara Whitmore. The guard showed no reaction, but the slightest twitch in his shoulders betrayed a ripple of tension. We know she was forced to work for Doss probably because of a loan she couldn't repay, Vance continued. But what we don't know is if she's still alive or if she's on that ship. The guard blinked slowly. I don't know what you're talking about, he said evenly. That's interesting, Vance replied, leaning forward just a fraction. Because you seem to know exactly who she was when her son mentioned her name last night. A flicker of recognition crossed the guard's face, quickly suppressed. Her son is here, by the way, Vance added. He identified you immediately. And let me tell you, he's determined to find his mother after 15 years of believing she abandoned him. Still no response, but the guard's eyes shifted slightly toward the mirror, just for a second. Vance didn't miss it. Here's the thing, he said, voice sharpening. We're going to catch up with that ship. The Coast Guard is already in pursuit, and when we do, everyone on board is going to start talking. Ronald Harvey Doss. They'll throw you under the bus in a heartbeat to save themselves. Finally, the guard's composure cracked. His gaze dropped to the table in front of him. You're looking at serious time, Vance pressed. Kidnapping, false imprisonment, human trafficking. But if you help us now, tell us where the ship is going, whether Clara is on board, I can put in a good word with the prosecutor. The guard was silent for a long time. Then he sighed. I'm old, he muttered. I'm sick. Prison's just another place to die. Then do one good thing before you go, Vance said gently. Help a family find their mother. The guard looked up. I don't know where the ship is going. That information is compartmentalized. But I can give you access to something that might help. There's an app, a secure messaging system we used. My login might still work. It has GPS tracking, camera feeds. It's how Ronald kept tabs on everything. Vance straightened, hope igniting behind his calm exterior. You're willing to provide access? The guard nodded. Like I said, might as well do something decent. Vance slid a notepad across the table. Write down everything we'll need. Back outside, Dylan was pacing. When Vance exited the room, holding the notepad, his expression was grim but determined. Let's get this to the tech team immediately, he said. They moved quickly down the corridor to the computer lab, where several officers sat at terminals. Vance handed the login to a young specialist. We need to access this without triggering alerts, he explained. Can you clone the session safely? The tech scanned the credentials and nodded. I can mirror the session and mask our location. Give me a few minutes. Vance and Dylan returned to the waiting area. The Whitmore family looked up as they entered, faces tense with waiting and worry. Did you learn anything? Max asked. We might have, Vance said carefully. The guard gave us login credentials to an app used by the organization. If it works, we'll be able to track the ship and maybe even see who's on board. You think she's alive? Julian asked quietly. That mom didn't just leave. That's what it's starting to look like, Dylan said. Dad told us how she was trying to manage the bills. It adds up. She got caught in something dangerous. But 15 years, Lena whispered, struggling to believe it. 15 years, and she never once tried to call us. If she thought we were in danger, Vance interjected gently, she may have stayed away to protect you. These people isolate their victims. Peter, seated in his wheelchair, looked up with watery eyes. I should have known, he said, voice thick with emotion. All this time, I thought she left because of me. Because I was broken. Dylan kneeled beside him, gripping his hand. None of us knew. But we're going to find her, Dad. We're going to bring her home. Just then, a young officer appeared at the lab door. Detective Vance, they've accessed the app. They want you in the lab now. The family rose as one, adrenaline pushing them forward. This might be the moment everything changed. Detective Vance's phone rang, interrupting the emotional moment. He answered it quickly, listening intently before saying, "We'll be right there." Turning to the family, he announced, "The tech team has accessed the app. They want us all in the computer lab immediately." Without hesitation, the Whitmore family rose as one. Max and Dylan flanked their father's wheelchair, Ellie and Lena positioned protectively on either side, and Julian walked just behind, unusually quiet. The group moved down the corridor like a single entity, pulled forward by the gravity of what they might finally see. The computer lab was a spacious, sterile room filled with a bank of monitors and the low hum of machinery. A specialist waved them over to a central station where a large screen showed a map of the Pacific Ocean, with a single blinking dot slowly moving southeast. "That's the eastern horizon," the technician said, pointing. "It's currently about 120 miles offshore and heading south-southeast. The Coast Guard has been updated with these coordinates." Detective Vance stepped closer. "What about video feeds? Can we get a visual?" The specialist nodded and began cycling through camera feeds. The app grants access to security cameras installed in specific zones, primarily workstations, common areas, and hallways. No feeds from private quarters. As the screens began to divide into multiple panels, each displaying grainy, low-light footage of the ship's interiors, the tension in the room thickened. Cargo containers, empty corridors, a kitchen. "Then, stop," Dylan said, pointing urgently. "That one. Can you zoom in?" The image enlarged to reveal a room filled with people sitting at computer desks, mostly women. Their backs were turned to the camera, movements robotic, faces obscured by angle and shadows. "That woman," Dylan said again, voice tightening. "Far corner, gray sweater. Zoom in more." The specialist complied, tapping keys swiftly, and the camera honed in on the woman's profile. Her hair, once chestnut brown, was now streaked with gray, pulled back in a simple bun. Her posture was familiar, precise yet tired. When she turned slightly to the side, the gasps in the room were immediate. Peter's breath hitched as his hand lifted instinctively. "Clara," he whispered. Ellie's hands flew to her mouth. Lena began to cry openly. Julian simply stared, as if frozen in disbelief. Max stepped back, then forward again, hands on his hips, unable to process the moment. But Dylan never looked away. His eyes filled with tears, but his expression remained steady. "I knew it," he murmured. Vance picked up the phone immediately. "We have visual confirmation of at least one victim on board," he reported. "Clara Whitmore, 15-year-old missing person case. There are multiple individuals on board, most appear female. Proceed with caution." Turning to the family, he said, "The Coast Guard is en route. They should intercept the ship within the next few hours. Once secured, everyone on board will be identified and brought to safety. We'll notify you as soon as Clara is confirmed and transported." Max finally spoke. "We can't do anything now, can we?" "No," Vance replied gently. "Now we wait and prepare." They returned to the waiting area, but the atmosphere had shifted. This wasn't the blank, despairing uncertainty that had colored their family for so many years. Now there was hope, tangible, visible on a screen in the shape of a woman they'd loved and missed for so long. Peter sat quietly, staring ahead, his hand trembling slightly in Dylan's. Ellie and Lena sat close together, heads resting against each other's shoulders. Max paced, unable to sit still, while Julian scribbled nervously in the margins of a notebook he carried everywhere. Dylan stood by the window, hands in his pockets, the weight of 15 years finally easing. Vance stood beside him. "She never gave up," he said softly. "That kind of resilience is rare." Dylan nodded. "She survived. Whatever they did, wherever they took her, she held on." He paused. "And now it's our turn." The minutes turned into hours as the Whitmore family waited in the station. The glow of the surveillance footage burned into their memories. Every few moments, someone would glance toward the hallway, hoping a uniformed officer would return with news. Detective Vance remained on calls, moving between rooms with tight updates, coordinating with the Coast Guard, and monitoring radio silence to prevent any leaks. The weight of anticipation was almost unbearable. Julian had stopped sketching and was curled on a bench, half asleep. Lena clutched Ellie's hand with one of hers and her phone in the other, scanning for news she wouldn't find. Peter had grown quiet, his face pale with the emotional toll, while Dylan stood alone, arms folded, eyes fixed on the entrance to the tech lab like a sentinel. Then the door burst open. An officer approached briskly, clipboard in hand, eyes serious. "They've reached the ship," he said. The room froze. "The Coast Guard made contact 20 minutes ago. They're in the process of boarding. No resistance so far." "Is she there?" Max asked, rising from his seat. "We'll know soon," the officer said. "But the operation is still unfolding. They're sweeping the vessel room by room." It was another 30 agonizing minutes before a second update arrived. This time, Detective Vance himself returned. "We have her," he announced, his voice firm but full of something more, relief, awe, maybe even pride. "Clara Whitmore has been located and identified. She's alive." Gasps, tears, stunned silence. Peter broke first, burying his face in his hands. Ellie collapsed against Lena, sobbing. Max turned away, wiping his eyes. Dylan gripped the back of a chair, knuckles white. "She was found in a working area near the stern," Vance continued. "She appears malnourished but conscious. She's being airlifted to a medical facility nearby for evaluation. The others on board, there were at least 20 people, are receiving care as well. Some may have been on board for years." "What about Ronald?" Dylan asked, his voice low. "He wasn't found," Vance said grimly. "Some crew escaped before the Coast Guard arrived. We suspect he was among them." "So he got away?" Max asked bitterly. "For now," Vance replied. "But with the evidence we've gathered and the testimonies of the people on board, we have enough to pursue him and dismantle everything Doss left behind." He turned to Peter. "We'll arrange transport for you to the hospital as soon as they give us the all-clear." "I want to see her," Peter whispered. "I need to see her." They arrived at the medical facility just after dusk. The exterior was quiet, surrounded by pine trees and cast in the soft gold of evening light. Clara had been stabilized, placed in a private recovery room under guard. A nurse met them at the entrance, her expression kind. "She's awake," she told Peter, "and asking for you." Peter's wheelchair rolled forward slowly, pushed by Max, flanked by the rest of the family. Outside her door, he paused, hand trembling as it reached for the handle. Then he pushed it open. Clara sat upright in bed, pale but unmistakably herself. The years had marked her, but not defeated her. Her eyes lit up when she saw Peter, and a sob escaped her lips. "Peter," she whispered. He crossed the room as fast as Max could push him, and when they reached the bedside, he took her hand. "I never stopped looking," he said, voice breaking. "I knew you didn't leave us. I knew it." Clara's fingers tightened around his. "I tried," she said. "They wouldn't let me." The reunion was silent at first, just touch, tears, the disbelief of physical contact after so long apart. Ellie approached next, followed by Lena, Julian, Max, and finally Dylan, who hung back until Clara looked up and whispered, "You found me." He nodded. "I told them you wouldn't leave us. I never stopped believing that." The family surrounded her, not bombarding her with questions, but simply existing in her presence, soaking in the reality of her return. It wasn't about answers yet. It was about restoration, healing. Later, she would tell them everything. About the day she went shopping, about the man who approached her in the parking lot with promises of financial help and new identities, about how one choice had spiraled into years of captivity, isolation, and controlled silence. She would describe the fake name, the warehouse, the boat, the quiet rebellion she maintained inside herself just to stay sane. But for now, they gave her what she had missed the most, the presence of her family. And though the shadows of Ronald Doss and his operation still loomed, that night, in a hospital room lit by soft light and filled with long-lost voices, Clara Whitmore was home. The following days unfolded in a surreal mixture of tenderness and investigation. Clara remained under observation at the medical center, her strength returning slowly but unmistakably. Her voice, hoarse at first, grew steadier with each passing hour, and her memory, razor-sharp, became the key to unraveling the operation that had swallowed her life for over a decade. Every member of the Whitmore family took turns sitting with her. Ellie brought her lavender lotion. Julian sketched her portrait. Max read aloud from a mystery novel she used to love. Lena styled her hair gently as Clara lay on the pillow, and Peter barely left her side, sometimes dozing off in his wheelchair, fingers still interlocked with hers. But it was Dylan who asked the hard questions when Clara finally said, "I'm ready." They gathered in her hospital room with Detective Vance, a small recorder on the table, the curtains drawn to shut out the soft spring light outside. Clara inhaled slowly. It started with a man named Raymond Doss. After Peter's accident, I was desperate. We were behind on everything: mortgage, utilities, school fees. I couldn't get a loan from any bank. Then a woman approached me outside the grocery store. She said she worked with people who could help, no questions asked. All I had to do was meet someone. The room fell into a deep silence. Dylan leaned forward. That someone was Raymond? Clara nodded. He didn't introduce himself right away. He said I could call him Mr. R. He offered to erase the debt, but I had to sign a lease on a property as part of the arrangement. I didn't understand why at first, but later I realized it was a way of transferring assets, hiding activities. The warehouse under Elizabeth Carter, that was me. He gave me that name. And then what? Vance asked. I thought I was free. For a while, it seemed like I was helping with logistics, signing shipments, receiving deliveries. But I started asking questions. That's when Ronald appeared. Her voice faltered slightly. Ronald was different. Cold. Calculating. He told me I knew too much and could never leave. That's when they moved me to the ship. How long were you there? Peter asked gently. Clara's lips quivered. 12 years. Before that, I was moved between houses, offices, always watched. But the ship, that was prison. They gave us routines to follow, meals, tasks. We were told if we tried to escape, our families would suffer. And I believed them. Vance scribbled notes as Clara continued. We used aliases, encrypted tablets, internal networks. Ronald ran everything remotely. I saw him only a few times. He never stayed long. Did you ever try to send a message? Dylan asked. Clara looked down. Many times. But everything was monitored. Once, I left a photo in a shipment crate with a message on the back. I don't know if anyone ever found it. We didn't, Ellie whispered. But we're here now. Clara smiled weakly. Detective Vance turned off the recorder. This is enough to open federal charges. We'll loop in Homeland Security, international task forces. With your testimony, we'll bring them down. Clara's expression hardened. They took too many lives. You have to find the others. Not just the victims, but the families, the ones who never knew what happened. We will, Vance promised. That night, Clara was transferred to a secure recovery wing. Outside, reporters had begun to gather, the story already spreading like wildfire. "Missing mother found after 15 years," headlines blazed across the news. But the family remained sheltered, protected by law enforcement and a fortress of love. Inside the hospital, in a quiet room above the chaos, the Whitmores shared their first dinner together in 15 years. Peter raised a plastic cup. "To Clara," he said, voice cracking. "To our miracle." Everyone echoed the toast. Dylan, looking across the table at his mother, finally felt the ache in his chest start to ease. She had returned, and she hadn't broken. Weeks passed, and with them, the whirlwind of national attention began to fade, replaced by the quiet and far more difficult task of rebuilding. Clara returned home to Flagstaff under protective custody, while the DOS operation continued to unravel across multiple states and offshore accounts. Testimonies from the other rescued victims confirmed much of Clara's story, and her detailed recollections helped authorities locate hidden assets, safe houses, and laundering channels once considered untraceable. Ronald remained at large, his name becoming a ghost that haunted the edges of news reports and police briefings. But despite the fear he once instilled, his power was dissolving. With every seized account and shuttered warehouse, his empire crumbled. Clara's homecoming was not marked by parades or press conferences, but by something quieter: familiarity. She wandered through the old Whitmore house with a reverence usually reserved for cathedrals, her fingers tracing the edge of the hallway where Dylan and Julian used to race, her gaze lingering on the worn corner of the couch where Peter once read the paper every morning. The kitchen smelled different, the paint in the living room was a new shade, but the soul of the place, its heartbeat, was intact. So were the people. Her children had grown into their own lives, bearing the scars of her absence, but also the resilience that had kept them afloat. Ellie returned to cooking with her mother, letting Clara relearn the rhythms of the kitchen one chopped onion at a time. Lena brought over new books each week, reading aloud by the fireplace. Julian showed her his artwork, a timeline of grief and growth, with Clara's image appearing again and again in pencil and paint. Max installed new locks on every door and made sure every window latched perfectly, his way of reclaiming control. And Dylan, quiet and ever watchful, remained her compass. He drove her to therapy appointments, helped her answer mail, but mostly he just listened. Peter was slower to recover. Years of guilt and sorrow had worn grooves into his spirit that no happy ending could immediately smooth. But Clara understood. They spent hours together in the garden, speaking softly, digging into soil as though they were planting something more than flowers, perhaps redemption. One morning, as the sun filtered through the oaks in golden shafts, Clara placed her hand over his. "We're here," she said. "You and me. Still." And Peter, eyes misting, simply nodded. One Thursday morning, a thick envelope arrived at their doorstep bearing the seal of the Department of Justice. Inside were court documents, formal charges, and a cover letter informing them that an international warrant had been officially issued for Ronald Morrow. Clara read it slowly, her fingers trembling only slightly. "They're closing in," she said aloud. "They're going to get him." No one answered immediately. There was nothing to add. They simply believed it. Weeks turned into months, and though Clara could never get those 15 years back, she began to stitch new days into place. She volunteered at a shelter for trafficking survivors, her voice soft but certain. She spoke at 2 universities under pseudonyms, educating students on the subtle traps of desperation and manipulation. She wrote letters to the families of the other rescued women, sometimes just a few lines, other times pages. Each letter was a lifeline tossed back into waters she had once barely escaped. One night, Dylan found her sitting alone on the porch, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You okay?" he asked. Clara nodded. "Do you think he's still out there?" "Ronald." Dylan sat beside her. Probably, he admitted. But he's running now. He's not in control anymore. She looked at her son, her voice almost a whisper. I want to see the ocean again. But this time from land. Dylan smiled. We'll make that happen. Later that year, on a cloudy morning in Monterey, California, Clara stood barefoot in the sand, the Pacific stretching out before her like an old memory reborn. The wind tangled in her hair, and waves crashed steadily in the distance. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Behind her, her entire family stood in a quiet arc, watching, waiting, supporting. She turned around and took Peter's hand. Let's go home, she said. Back in Flagstaff, life continued. Clara joined a local writing group. Peter began attending a support circle for trauma caregivers. Ellie started culinary school. Max proposed to his girlfriend. Lena's bookstore hosted a panel on missing persons advocacy. Julian's sketches of Clara, before and after, were displayed in a gallery downtown. And Dylan? He started writing. His story, her story, their story. One crisp autumn afternoon, Detective Vance visited the family, this time as a friend. He brought with him a small package, no note, just a USB drive inside. We think it's a lead, he said. Anonymous tip. We're running it down. I wanted you to have the update first. Clara held the drive but didn't plug it in right away. Instead, she placed it in a drawer beside old family photographs. Later, she said. For now, there was peace. Not perfect peace. There were still nightmares, flashbacks, unanswered questions. But there was love, reconnection, the unshakable truth that while evil may have stolen years, it had not won. It had not broken them. The Whitmores had become a constellation of resilience, each of them a point of light that, when connected, spelled not tragedy, but triumph. Clara had not vanished. She had survived. And now she was home for good. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more gripping narratives based on real mysteries and hidden truths. What part of Clara's journey struck you the most? Do you believe Ronald will ever be caught? And where are you watching from? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take.